Hector Hectorson is the most prominent guide maker in Final Fantasy XIV today. If you use Party Finder at all in the West, you've probably run into parties using his strats. Lately, there have been a lot of complaints about him and the impact that he has over Party Finder. I think that a lot of people misunderstand the point of his guides and to a larger extent, the community's relationship with guides as a whole. But why exactly do people complain about Hector? A key part of this is the timing. Hector had guides up for all fights in the tier within 10 days of release. This also includes the alternative same bait strat video for M1S that he uploaded later based on the developing Party Finder trends. Not bad at all if you ask me. Most players in your typical raid tier will still be on the first or second fight at most by the end of week 1. Players that complete the tier in the first week in Party Finder are definitely in the minority. The problem is, this wasn't a typical tier. You've maybe heard by now, but this tier is considered to be one of the easiest in the history of the game, and the stats certainly hold up. The world race was over in only 9 hours, with 30 teams clearing in day 1 compared to the 4 teams clearing in day 1 of Asphodelo's last expansion. Even if your experience may vary in Party Finder, many players are finding themselves much further along than they would have in previous tiers. This has led to more people coming up with early strats sooner, which leads to our first complaint: the saturation of strats. For players progging M3S and M4S, many will have already been using some variant of the pace spin strats going around. What happens when Hector releases a video is that a lot of parties will start to shift to using his strategies. This causes a lot of friction if you've already learned the existing strats going around. It means suddenly having to learn new strats that might be different from what you're used to. Another issue is that the strats are sometimes viewed as worse than the ones that they are replacing. It doesn't matter if Party Finder had a fantastic pace spin strategy or really likes another guide from a creator like Renon. Once the Hector video is out, most people in parties will swap to it, and not learning it severely limits your options. This leads us to our next complaint. One of the comments I'll see is that people don't always like every strat that Hector uses in his videos. Combine that with the dominance that his guides have, and it means that you're forced into doing something that you feel is worse. This means a lot in Party Finder when so many players are stressed and trying to get their clear. Imagine progging the same fight for a week, feeling so close to the clear, and now you have to learn something new and seemingly inferior to what you've already been doing. There are a lot of reasons to want to clear, and it's a huge time investment, so I really understand the frustrations. That said, I think that people place their blame in the wrong spots. I'll get straight to the point. I think that people are wrong about Hector and how they place responsibility on him for the state of Party Finder. Like every guide maker out there, he's trying to help people. People latch onto Hector's guides for many different reasons. It's important to remember, and you've probably experienced this in school, that people have different learning styles. For example, while I really appreciate Hector's animated guides and perspectives, what I most value about him is hearing the mechanic and strategy explained in voice. I often pair this with someone like Yukizuri because seeing footage of the execution really cements the movement of what I need to do. It certainly helps that Yukizuri also plays a healer, so I get the specific point of view that I need, even if their strats won't always match up to what we're doing in NA perfectly. To me, this doesn't matter because my focus is on unpacking mechanics and how the strategies tackle them. This way, I can come up with solutions in my head on how to take one strategy and make it work with another where applicable. This also helps for me to simplify what the video is telling me. In my opinion, the community has a big problem with learning what to do but not why they are doing it. That's the difference between a player knowing how to adjust if someone messes up, say their spot on a mechanic, versus giving up the moment things fall off the script. While this is obviously a harder skill to build in Party Finder without voice communication, it's still useful anyway. How this relates to Hector is that I think sometimes people get stuck on one strat that it caused them to make a bigger deal out of Hector's differences than there actually is. For example, let's take a look at Hector's version of Final Fuse down on M3S, one of the major prog points in Party Finder. The 4 short fused exploding players all spread near each other opposite of the relative north proposed in the raid plan, which really just means opposite the bomb in the north with a long fuse. In Hector's version, he leverages the fact that the long fuse bomb in the north is also a safe area. Like many other mechanics where Group 1 is north and Group 2 is south, the range short fuse player in Group 1 goes north every single time. Personally, I appreciate consistency like this with respect to group assignments. It also means that ranged players only ever have to look at the north or south corners to find the safe spots, leaving the melees to position relative to the boss. For the long fuse players, the strats are almost identical, just with Group 1 being potentially south instead of north depending on the orientation of the safe spots in the pace spin strat. Whereas in Hector, Group 1 is always north or west and Group 2 is always south and east. I think that positional consistency between fights matters a lot. Regardless, outside of needing time to learn and adjust, I think that it's a little silly for someone to have major issues adjusting to a strat that gives more space for players to spread. The less room for error, the better if you ask me, and overlapping spreads causes a lot of wipes in Party Finder here. Aside from this, the pastebin and Hector strats aren't much different. The only other major difference is the fuse field ordering, which I personally don't care what order we use as long as we clarify before the pull. Maybe one of y'all can tell me how range melee range is somehow better or worse than melee range, but I don't really see an issue with either myself. As long as I know what number I am in my role group, I'm good to go. And that's it for M3S. I haven't looked as much at the pastebin for M4S, but I know at the start that Hector said he based a lot of his strats on the pastebin anyway. Many party finders also list their strats as pastebin/Hector, or Hector/Sababin, however you want to call it. If you have a deeper explanation of why Hector negatively impacted the tier for you, please let me know in the comments because I do want to understand the problems better, and I only have my own perspective as well as the ones that I can see easily. YouTube gives me a much bigger audience to learn from and talk to, and I do enjoy that. Oh, and while we're on the topic, I just want to say that Hector's beat 3 defamation strat is just straight up better than having specific spots like clocks or inner cards. Feel free to debate me in the comments if you want, but I can't see how simply standing still or moving out isn't the easiest way to resolve that. Anyway, I think that people need to put more time into practicing fights and learning various strats. It'll make you a better, more adaptable player. And I don't mean learning every single strat out there, just try your best to really understand what's going on and why you're doing things. There will always be moments in Party Finder where multiple strats exist at once, especially early on. I think at this moment, every Savage fight has at least 4 to 5 guide videos on YouTube this tier. I assume most of these are the same or similar, but imagine a world where we had 4 to 5 very different strats at once in Party Finder with equal representation. Would you really prefer that over having 1 or 2 that might not be the cleanest or most optimal? And yeah, I think it kinda sucks when a strat isn't ideal but people don't want to change. And to that, I say this to both the guide makers and the players out there. Do something about it. I got into guide making last year with EX7 and Endwalker, and I plan on continuing to make guides for this tier. And on that note, if you want to support me in the stuff I'm cooking both here and on my new Final Fantasy XIV resource website, thestudium.gg, consider joining as a member on my YouTube channel. It helps a lot to give me as much time as I can to work on content. But anyway, I say be the change that you want to see, and Hector himself as well as many other guide makers out there have done that. Like I mentioned earlier, he actually posted an alternative strat that most people now use for M1S. Later on, he made a new video with some updated tips on M1S, and I regularly see the new Starvey MTTT strat featured in that being used for raining cats now, even though it wasn't in the original Hector guide. More people could and should do things like this. Information can't spread if you don't do your part, and just complaining on Twitter about how Hector makes guides on fights that he hasn't cleared helps nobody. And let's be honest, you don't have to clear a fight to understand the strats being used if you're willing to study, pay attention, and talk to people, and thinking otherwise invalidates every high-end raid team with people assisting them with strats when they aren't in the main raid squad. Do you really think that the 9 players on teams like Echo don't understand the fights that they are helping with just because they aren't in the instance getting the clear right away? That's just foolish to me. Are there valuable lessons to be learned that are easier to discover when you're playing? Absolutely, but these aren't requirements to clear a fight. These things often help with testing new strats and making it out of recovery situations. Hector's guides don't exist to teach these things, and that's okay. They exist to give people in Party Finder an understandable way to clear a fight based on the knowledge that Hector has not only from his own statics progression, but also the community and research that he does. You can literally go to the balance to see Hector talking about strats just like other players. He's not just isolated in a bubble putting out stuff that his static cooked up on their own. Even if you don't want to be a guide maker, simply getting involved by sharing strats in raid plans, short clips, or images can be an easy way to help people. And then sometimes those strats get picked up and shared around in Discords, on Twitter, or even in guides. Progression is truly a community experience, and it's only as good as the effort we all put into it. Anyway, hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy, homies.